Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we're Masech the Zevachim Daf Ches. We're going to begin on the bottom of Zayin Mid Beis, the second line from the bottom. So our Mishnah opened up this Masechta discussing that when a person has the wrong intentions, Shlo L'Shema, that it is kosher. Nonetheless, that carbon is not oil l'shem chayva. It doesn't work for the owner. He has to bring another one. However, the Mishnah did give examples of exceptions to that, and everyone holds, when it comes to a chatos, that when it comes to a sin offering, it's possible. And this Gemara wonders why. Chatos menol. The chsiv, because the pasuk says, and we'll quote the whole pasuk in Sefer Vayikra, the samach es yado al rosh chatos, that you did smicha on the carbon chatos, v'shachat osah, and you shechted it for a chatas. So oil in the same place where the oil is shechted. So the fact that it says it that way, the shachat osa is l'chatas shtei shchita l'shem chatas. That it has to be for the sake of a chatas, and if therefore you had any other carbon in mind, b'shah shchita, or during any times of the avoda, then it would be possible. So ashkan shchita, kabal manon. Again, just because it says shchita, we know shchita we're lenient in there are certain aspects that's kasher bizarre, and non-Kohen can do the shchita. So how do we know Kabbalah, which is a non-Kohen is not allowed to do, the accepting of the blood? Minon dechsev, because the pasuk says, and now we go to Chesed and Aleph. So this pasuk, which is also just the next pasuk actually, v'lakach hakoyin midam hachatos, that the kohen will take from the dam be'etzba'oi with his finger, v'nosan al karnos mizbach oila, and he puts it on the corners of the altar. It's called dami yishmach yisod mizbeach, and he pours the blood as well on the mizbeach. So we learn out from here. Then, since it says medam chatos, shetei kabol l'shem chatos, then it has to be l'shem chatos. V'ashkan shchita v'kabol. Okay, so we got the first two steps. Zrika Manolan. Now, this is interesting because there's actually another stage over here. It doesn't mention Hoylacha. So in this, Rashi points out right away the Hoylacha lo ister kra. We don't need a pasuk for that. To bechlal Kabbalahi misrabiyahai. It's considered to be like part of Kabbalah, so therefore it's like included in that. So therefore, once we prove Kabbalah, you don't need anything for Hoylacha. Now, we also mentioned that hoylacha is the one avoda that can be skipped. That if you would do the shchita right next to the mizbeach and you do the kabbal's dam right there, you don't have to move, and you can just immediately put the blood there. So anyway, how do we know that this din also applies to zrika? Zrika no. Diyom, because the pasuk says here, it's in a different parak. It says v'hevias ashamai, that you bring the asham Hashem al chatasu asher chata, together with the chatas, the sin which you sinned, nekeva minatzain. So when it comes to this carbon, it could be a female sheep, either kisba or seiris izim. It could either be a female sheep or a female goat, l'chatas, and that is allowed to be brought as a chatas, which of course is the din by any chatas. Carbon yachid, it's a kispa or seira. The chipa of a koyin michatasai. Okay, so hevias hashamol Hashem is the pasuk, and let's see the Gemara. This is v'chipor of hakoyin michatasai shetei kapara l'shem chatas. That when you do the kapara, which is the zrika, because the zrika sadam is what achieves the kapara, it must be lishma. So ashkan shini kaidish, shini bala menon. So merkra. So we go back to the psukim before. It says alav, v'lo al chaveroi. It has to be for you and not for your friend. So ashkan lemitzvah lak menon, as we asked in yesterday's daf. Maybe it's just this lachatchila that it should be done this way. How do we know it's mamish ma'akim, the whole thing that doesn't fly? Kidi oimer Rab Huna b'Rabbi Yeshua chatos chatasai hachanami chatas chatasai. What is how does this an answer? What does that mean? So Rashi says, since it could have said, Michatos Diksiv Vav Yesera Lemedrish Ba L'Shem Bailim. So the fact that it says Chatasoi, this extra Vav is the riboy. So Ashkan Mitzvah B'Shini Kaidish. Now I understand that when it comes to Shini Kaidish, with regard to all the Zrika, all the Avoda, including Zrika, it's a mitzvah and it's ikuv if you don't do it. Okay, so I understand because it says chatasai, so I agree to that. But v'zrika b'shinoi ba'alam bein l'mitzvah bein l'akiv, and also when it comes to zrika, l'akiv b'chol avodas b'shinoi kodesh sheshar avodas b'shinoi ba'alam bein l'mitzvah bein l'akiv and on. How about the rest? So Rav Yona asya mechatas nazir. So even though some of what we learned is la'akiv, but we're going to need to borrow to be able to teach the same din applies to other things from the carbon chatas that a nazir needs to bring. Because it says regarding the nazir, the hikra b'koin lifnei Hashem, the says chataso v'yas oilasoi, that he brings a chatas and an oila by the nazir. And that's what it says. V'asa. So it says v'asa. He does this, and it says chataso and olaso. Why does it have to say his chatas, his oila? It must be shini balam doesn't work. Shehu kol asuya b'shem chatas. So ashkan shini kaidish shini balam and olin. I understand by shini shinoi kaidish it has to be a chatas. It has to be for the sake of an ola. How do shinoi balam and olin? So let's just see the parentheses. So that concept we've said before, if it's already mentioned, we already learned out the din of Shinoi Kodesh from another pasuk, so we say Imenu Inyan, we can imply it for something else, because it's otherwise it's just a drashi Yisera for something. Ashkel Mitzvah Menol. So Amar Rabbi Yeshua Chatas Chatasai. So we learn out again from that extra vav. So Maskiv Ravina. Miata oilos oiloso my darshbe. It also says the extra vav regarding an oila. So it does, but it does work by an asham, as it's stated in our Mishnah at the beginning of the Masechta. It's kosher. If it was an oila, it's not oila. Has to be l'shem olaso, or else it's puzzle. So we're saying by achatas, if you have a different machshava, it's l'shema, then it doesn't work. It's puzzle. But then you should say the same thing when it comes to an ola, but we know that's not what our Mishnah says. Our Mishnah does allow it. So Ravina minchas minchasoi nesach nischai my darshbahu. And you can even go further and say, even if you want to say according to Ravina, that maybe it's not a kasha when it comes to oila, but it does say minchaso, it does say nischo. It's also written there by a nazir. So you have the same problem. What do you do with those words? No, so we could find it for something. Minchasa miniskehem belayla, minchasa miniskehem afilo machar. It comes to tell you this special din that when it says the mincha offering, the flower offering, and the libation, it could be brought at night and even the next day. It's fine. So you would think, well, maybe the accompaniment of these items need to be at the same time as the actual carbon being brought. So maybe that is preferable, possibly, but it's not ma'akev, and therefore, if you would bring it the next day or at night, it's fine. So hachinami darshinan lahai v'asu es minchaso kol zman shiasenu hu kori minchasai. So the chiddush is that it's still considered a mincha. It's still considered a libation, even though you didn't do it at the exact same time. It's still linked to the carbon, even if it was done later on. That's what it's come to tell you when it comes to those things. Okay, how about an ola? Well, an ola is the carbon itself. So what are we going to use for that extra vav? Furthermore, mi gamiri mahadadi. Do we actually learn these one to the next is Rashi Shar Chatais. Other times a chatas is brought michatas nazir to a specific case of a chatas of a nazir. Is it true that you can just learn out from nazir? It's not necessarily the case. Chatas chaylev mechatas nazir lo gamra. You can't learn out the typical case of chatas chaylev, of eating non-kosher fats, in which, of course, the din is you have to bring a chatas, as opposed to the chatas of a nazir, shechein yesh ima dami macher. Because when it comes to a nazir, there's other bloods that are being sprinkled. A nazir doesn't just bring a chatas, right? They bring other karbonos, as we saw in the pasuk, oil or whatever, right? So he brings other karbonos. So you can't learn out. So maybe the reason why we're strict when it comes to a chatas nazir is because there's other requirements over there. Other requirements require also maybe that it has to be done lishma by a chatas nazir. How do we know by chatas chayil? So you can't learn out one from the other. So chatas nazir chatas chayil v'lo gamra shechein kares. And the other way around, you can't learn out because chatas chayil. Why are you bringing this? Because it's mechaper for the chayvi krisus if you would have done it b'mezid. However, a nazir, he's not chayv kares, right? He made a decision to become a nazir. So that karban chatas is maybe for a different reason, maybe because shesiras atzman yayin, he shouldn't have deprived himself from wine, but it's not an iser kares. So you can't learn out from it. So therefore, you really the whole notion of learning from chatas nazir doesn't work. So maybe we'll learn out from the chatas mitzvah because the pasuk says over there, v'yasa koines chatos. He has to bring the chatos, and it says v'chipra al hamatahir metumasai, and he'll become pure from his tumah. Then after that, of course, to bring the oila, you always bring the chatas before the oila, as you can see it prefers psukim all over the place. So what do we see from here? Shehu kol asiyasa l'shem chatas. How do we know that's also true when it comes to shinui balim? If you have a chatas matzah and you have the wrong machshava, then it doesn't work. So because the pasuk says v'chipra al hamataher b'gaymer, it says the kapara is on this person. Right? Al hamatahir zeh v'lo al hamatahir chaver, not someone else. Vikati mi yalfa mahadadi, same thing. How can you learn a chatas chayil mechatas mitzara? Well, yalfa, you can't. Again, for similar reasons. Shechein yesh ima damim macherim. When it comes to a mitzara, we know the mitzara has other things that are brought, including the birds. Chatas mitzara mechatas chayil v'lo gamer shechein kares. Again, chatas chayil is for someone who violated b'mezid would be chayv kares. B'shogeg he brings the chatas. This is not when it comes to mitzara, so you can't learn out from there. So mechad deluasya, you can't learn out from either chatas nazir or chatas mitzara. But as the Gemara in numerous places does, and beginning in Kedusha and other places, teisachad matarti. Let's learn one from two. So b'hayu lo lichtov. So let's say one of them. Which one would we mention? Don't mention chatas chaylev v'teisa mahanach. Learn out from the other two. Melhana shechein yesh imahin dam and macher. Nazir mitzara. There's other karbonos. So this is an interesting difference because a nazir, a chacham could come and be nishal that neder, that promise of being a nazir, and he could uproot the nazirus, and you'll be put from a carbon altogether. So only by a chatas mitzayra is there a din of oil of yared. Says Rashi, she'ein chatois yeredes me'aniyos l'havi oif. Okay. El oimer kra zois atayra oil mincha. Of course, v'gaymer, this pasuk which we've quoted over and over, which mentions the mincha, achatas, oshem, luyim, zevach shlomim. So kishur kasav l'shlom mashlam and bein shuni kodesh bein shuni baal bein l'shmol mitzvah. That's ma'akev. Avchatas bein shuni kodesh bein shuni baal beinon l'shmol mitzvah. Hilkach mitzvah mishlamim. So we learn out that the mitzvah to do it, we can actually learn out from mishlamim that this is a preferable. And then v'hanach kroi, the other psukim we quoted before is la'akev. is to say that it's mamish ma'akev. If you don't do it properly by a chatas, then it doesn't work. Yashon chatas chaylev dechsib bal chatas. I can understand when it talks about chatas chaylev, the typical carbon chatas, because it says over there lechatas, as we continue to chesim and beis, chatas diabodas kachavim. The Shmias HaKoyel Bitus of Asayim and Tumas Mikdash V'Kadasha of the Luksi B'Hu Menon. So there are other times in which a chatas needs to be brought. For example, when it comes to Avodah Zarah, says Rashi, D'Ksib B'Parsha Shlach L'Chav L'Uksi B'Hayin Yona D'Chein Chatas D'Shmias HaKoyel, a person who knows, let's say, testimony, and they say they don't know, but they do know, and they lie, or a person who is Tumas Mikdash V'Kadasha, which is also, these are cases, that's a case of Tumas. There's a din of oil v'yared, depending on one's financial status. The looks of menol. So how do we know when it comes to those chatois? Also, we say that it's ma'akev. So chatas chachavim, atzis mechatas chelav, shechein kares kamoisa. You can learn from Avodas Chachamim because Avodas Chachamim is so strict also, because it's a din kares. V'hanach kuli astin b'matzad. And the other ones you can learn through a sada shava. And Rashi helps us out with that. You need to really see this Rashi. But I guess the Gemara is like, you know how to do a sada shava. Rashi helps us out. You can learn out from the other things. So maybe the only reason why, if you bring a carbon chatas, this is Rashi. When it comes to a chatas chela, in which if you would have violated b'meis as a chiv kares, maybe that's why shalosh shemot is possible. No, it's not true, because chatas nazir mitzar yochichu. Because by mitzar and nazir, they're not bringing the chatas because there would be a chiv nazir b'meis, chiv kares b'meizid. You have malachatas nazir mitzar shechein yeshim adam imacher. There's other karbanos. You have malachatas chel toichiach. There's only one carbon. So a sada shav shemehen etc. Afenivi chatas the shmias hakoyel would come include those as well. And then Rashi says, so maybe the as we said, these cases are oil yared. So maybe it's a cool over there, since it's oil yared, so maybe it won't apply. So therefore, from chatas chaylev and only one you can't learn out because of these extra things, these other things. Bitus v'asayim, tumas mikdash, as mentioned b'sakta shvuos. These are cases of oil yared. V'im chatas chaylev v'chatas matzara yikel mever chamal asad shavush hem shechein einon b'sheila. Termer b'shvua shish b'sheila. Again, this is brought down. These are cases of shvua. It doesn't mention not tumas mikdash v'kadashav, but shvuas bitu, etc. So in that situation is she'ela. Okay. All right. So let's look at a question or two. TA 18. Of course, I got that wrong. Be'elu chatoy selfin mikra the psul shinui kodesh v'shinui balam. 3. I got it completely wrong. Oh, what are the chatois? Ve'elu chatos be'inan l'melef b'ma'atzad. I'm not sure why I can't get this. I mean, I should have gotten some of this right. Chatas chelav, obviously. Nazir and Mitzara, we learn from Psukim. However, when it comes to Chatas Tumas Mikdash Kadashim, Shmias Kol Bitus of Asayim, doesn't mention Tumas Mikdash Kadash. Oh, it does. Tumas Mikdash Kadashim, Shmias Kol Bitus of Asayim, just writes it out of order. Yopa Matzad. Okay, so that is the correct answer. And again, I got that completely wrong, unfortunately. So let's see what I wrote over here. Yeah, wrong. Okay. All right. TB 19 maybe. Oh, I didn't mark this down. Why didn't I mark this down? Let's see, what is TB 19? Amar Rabbi Chatas sheshachta al mi shemechuyev oil kshira al mi she'en mechuyev klum psula ber. Oh, so I did mark this. That's Zayin Mebez. whether or not, because an oila does include also is for an Isra Aseh, but a Chatas could also cover it. But if you already brought an oila, you're bringing an oila, so it's already designated for that oila, for that Aseh. Okay. As opposed to if you have no Avera whatsoever, Mishin Mechuyev Klum, it's possible because the oila, the Chatas would cover that. Okay. Because no one doesn't sin. Okay, here's a good question. So that should be damim yiserim. Chaylev v'nazir yosim mitzarech and mitzar yosim and nazir chatas. Okay, that's actually a good question. So let's see. Wow, it's totally wrong. So one is so let me just write this quickly. Chatas chaylev is kares. Nazir umitzayra. Let's get the language correct. Let's see. Shechein yeshim hem damim acherim. Damim acherim. And let's see. Mahanach malachanach loy lichter brachmana v'chatas nazir tez mahanach shechein ein lehem she'ela. Okay. Nazir yesh she'ela. I'll just write the word l'chacham so I'll remember what this is talking about. This is TB20. Okay. Pretty hard, I guess, to remember all this stuff. So damim acherim she'ela, and of course, lo lichter brachmana b'chatas mitzayra v'teisi mahanach malahana shechein ein behen bedali dalis. So maybe that's what in boim bedalis. So as opposed to chatas mitzayra, only chatas mitzayra there's a din of yared. Okay, so let me write that down. Chatas. I should write that down. Chatas mitzayra is an oil of yared. I'll just write it that way so I can understand what I'm talking about. Okay, all right, that's TB20. That's a great question. Good. Let's keep going. All right, we're in Chesamid Beis, and let's see what we're up to here. Tanurban. Pesach, so we mentioned in our Mishnah, when it comes to a carbon Pesach, and we already discussed this a little in yesterday's daf, when it comes to a carbon Pesach, the din is that it's supposed to be shechted properly at Bismanoi, is after Chatzos on the 14th of Nisan, an Erev Pesach. Now, the interesting thing about a carbon Pesach, as we're going to see here again, is that when it comes to a carbon Pesach, all the rest of the year, it has the din of a shlomim. Okay, so let's keep all that in mind. Maybe this will help us out. Tanurban, Pesach Bismanoi Lishmo Kosher. Obviously, right? If you bring a carbon Pesach on Erev Pesach, and you're thinking, this is a carbon Pesach, and I'm going to be bringing this to my home. Of course, it's kosher. That's not a chiddush. Shlo shmo pasol. The chiddush is at the time that you did the shechita, the carbon pesach, during the right time. So just like the chatas, here if it's shlo l'shmo is pasol. However, shayimos hashana, let's say you take a carbon pesach, and it's November, December, right? So l'shmo pasol. If it's for carbon Pesach and you're doing it in November, it's possible. However, here's the catcher: Shalol Shmo kosher. If let's say you take a carbon Pesach in November and you say, I want this carbon to be a shlomim. This carbon is a shlomim, then it actually is kosher, because as we said, that carbon actually takes upon itself the din as a shlomim anyway. Shayimos Hashana. Shloi kivatzin maher batzim bas siman. So minanamili, because how do we know all this, right? How do we ascertain all this information? So the Gemara says like this: Amar Abu Dishmol, because the pasuk says in Vayikra Gimel, it says as follows: Ve'im min hatzayin karbanai. If, let's say, you have a carbon as a zevach shlomim, a shlomim from a sheep, zachan akeva tomim yakrivenu. Again, when it comes to a carbon yachid, and a shlomim can be brought male or female. A chatas yachid has to be either kisa or seira. It has to be a female carbon. And not typically, always, a carbon sibor is a zachar. Okay. Omer kra. So that's v'im min atzayin karbanu zevach shlomim lahashem. Davar haba min atzayin nehil zevach shlomim. An animal that is a carbon which is a tzayin, which includes a carbon pesach, is a shlomim. So we learn that out. So ema shlomim in. Maybe another time of the year when it's not Pesach time, it's a shlomim midachrina lo, but nothing else. So Omer Rav Ila, Omer Rav Yochanan lo zevach lo rabos kol zevach. It's coming to include anything. So says Rashi, al korchach shlo bezman kaimer. It has to be talking about not during the normal time. Di bezmano, if let's say you're doing the shchita of this carbon on Erev Pesach, hayafin le'el the pasul. We already know that it's going to be pasul if you shecht it shlo lishma bizmanoi. So therefore, if you shecht it shlo lishma, must be talking about shechting it shlo lishma during the rest of the year, then it is kosher. So ema kol the shachit lahavi kemoisa. Why is it a shlomim? It should be for whatever carbon you thought it would be, like an oila. So if you have a Pesach and you're thinking, this is an oil, it becomes a shlomim. Why? Why don't we just say that it's an oil, maybe taka should be an oil. So ihav iksiv lishlomim zevach kedikamrit. Tasha iksiv zevach shlomim l'chol deshachim lishlom l'havi. For any thought that you have, even if, let's say, you're thinking it's an oil, it'll still be a shlomim. Again, this is a carbon Pesach during the rest of the year. Aim was zevach klal. Maybe let's look at the pasuk. It says the word zevach. That's more inclusive. Shlomim is prat. So you have klal prat. Aim b'chal masha b'prat. Shlomim in midachrina lo. Maybe this did should only work for the machshav of a shlomim. Mulashem hod b'chal. So therefore it includes everything. Any machshav of shol shma, thinking it's going to be an oila, then it still works. Shlo b'zman, and that's the din. So Maskam Rav Yaakov ben Harpakoid, Haludami Klol Batrol Klol Kama. You have to have the two klolim similar. We had this a couple of dafim ago. Klol Kama Marbi Zevachim V'sulo. The first klal, the fact that it says that it is the fact that it says, why can't I find it? Shlom Zevach, right? That includes only karbonos. Klal Batrol Hashem is called Hashem. That's more inclusive. So Hatandi Rebbe Shmuel B'chlali Prati Darsh. We actually Ki Hagavna. It could be different klals. So when it comes to B'chlali Prati Darsh Ki Hagavna. So actually, this opinion holds that even the first klal and the second klal are not exactly identical in its inclusion level. Nonetheless, it still works. Klal Prati Klal Yata Denel Kana Prat Ma Prama Forish. Shehu Shlo Shma V'Kasher, that again it works. B'Shari Mos Hashana, the carbon Pesach that's considered to be kosher of Shlo Shma. Avkol Shlo Shma, Avkoil Shehu Shlo Shma V'Kasher. And 1 second, Ima Mi Maha Prat. When it comes to this Prat, which is in the middle, when it says specifically Shlomim, so Meforish davar haba b'nenim and adava. Avkol haba b'nenim and adava. So oyel b'shlomim in chatas l'ashem lo. So how do you know if your machshav is by a chat? Again, you have a carbon pesach. It's November, and you're thinking this is a chatas and asham. How do you know that works? Maybe not. Maybe it has to be ke'ena prat, which is something which is like a neder nedava, which is kind of like a free will offering. A chatas and asham is not your choice. It's a chiyuv to have to do. El lazevach riboyhu. The fact that it says Zevach is a riboy, who says Rashi, Ein washing klal, v'lo darshin le klal prat. We're not actually learning klal prat and prat. She'ein klalos upratos boyin, mariboy washin el mashmois hamikrois. V'chein min habehema klal, and gives another example to that, and therefore it's really l'zevach riboihu. So emo l'chol d'shachit le lahavi kavase. Why don't we say the same questions we said before? Why is it a shlomim? It should be for whatever carbon you thought it would be. So you have the machshava, even though it's really carbon pesach, but again it was sharimos hashana, shlosh shman, you had an intention for it to be an olah. What would be an olah? So the same question. So Rav Oven, as we can do Testimud Aleph, doichin kodshim hanecholim etzel kodshim hanecholim. Ve'in doichin kodshim hanecholim etzel kodshim she'ein hanecholim. So says Rashi, Pesach zeh metchila hukdush Hashem carbon hanechol. So originally this carbon, again, even though it's a carbon Pesach, but it's not during the right time of the year, but if everything would have been done properly, that carbon would have been eaten. It's better to say that let it be a shlomim because it's more comparable to it because it's also a carbon that is eaten, but not an ola, which of course is kolil, which is completely burnt up. Atu what? Chatas ashim milamas achli. Understand? So an asham and a chatas, it's also eaten, seen by kohanim, whatever. But the point is, it's still eaten. So therefore, again, okay, fine. It's not going to be an ola, but maybe if you have the machshav of a chatos or an asham, that it should be a chatos and asham. El doichin kashim henecham l'chol adam. Neitzu kashim henecham l'chol adam. Vein doichin kashim henecham l'chol adam. Neitzu kashim shen nechol l'chol adam. Because an asham and a chatos, even though it's eaten, it's only eaten by the kohanim, and therefore it's not comparable. Therefore, if we're going to transfer this name of a Pesach to another carbon, it's always going to be a shlomim because it's most comparable to it. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Oven Omer doichin kachim kalim etzel kadashim kalim vein doichin kadashim kalim etzel kachim kachi kadashim. So it's a second answer. It's the same. We get to the same finish line. Is that a shlomim is a kadashim kalim, carbon Pesach, just like Bechor and Ma'aser Behem are kadashim kalim. So therefore, it makes sense. Again, the question is why doesn't compare to that? But again, it says the word shlomim. So the point is, it will become a shlomim, but it cannot elevate itself to a different status, which is like a chatas, an ola, or an asham, which are kachi kadashim. Okay, we'll stop here. Maybe we have more question. T-A, no. T-B, no. Question. 14. I guess I didn't do this. Okay. Carbon is really wild. But how do we find a carbon if it was done with the right intention? It's puzzle, but it was not with the right intention. It's kosher. The answer is a carbon Pesach. A carbon Pesach. If your intention in November is this carbon Pesach, I'm bringing it as a carbon Pesach, it's possible. However, Sharimos Hashana, if you say, I want this carbon to be some, let's just keep it simple, a shlomim, so then it becomes a shlomim and it is kosher. Ad kan.